4 days. That was all that stood between her and the end of everything. On a mountain with no name, the wind cut through the pines like someone holding their breath. The field stretched gray and frozen beneath a sky heavy with coming snow. Then, far off, a thin column of smoke rose, the only sign that anyone still lived up here. The camera draws closer. A low log house settled into the slope as if it had grown out of the rock itself. The left gatepost cracked. The garden killed by frost. The porch boards on the right rotted from the inside, the kind of rot the eye doesn't catch until a foot goes through. Inside, a man stands still at a doorway. 4 years and he has not touched a single thing in the room at the end of the hall, not because he forgot. Because touching them would mean deciding something he isn't ready to decide. And down at the base of the mountain, a coach climbs the narrow track. On the seat, a woman presses both her hands flat against her thighs. They are shaking. No one can see it. She learned, somewhere along the way, how to shake on the inside, in a place no one can reach. The coach stops. A quarter-mile left to go. She arrived on a Tuesday. Nobody asked her to come on a Tuesday. The stage from Dodge City ran Mondays and Thursdays. But the Monday coach had a broken axle outside of Pratt, and the Thursday one was full. And Maren Holst had exactly 4 days before the bank's notice expired, and her last option with it. So, Tuesday it was. She had $3, a needle case her mother left her, and a canvas bag that held everything she had decided was worth carrying into whatever came next. Not much, but enough. She had decided it was enough. The ride up into the mountains took 2 hours past the last town, with a name anyone bothered to put on a map. The driver was a man of about 60, with a beard that had given up, trying to grow in any particular direction. He didn't speak for the first hour. Then he said, without turning around, "Briggs doesn't talk much." Maren looked up from her hands. "The man you're going to," he said. "Colt Briggs. Good man. Just doesn't talk much." "I don't need conversation," she said. The driver made a sound that wasn't quite agreement, and wasn't quite doubt. The kind of sound a man makes when he knows something the other person is going to find out anyway, and has decided to let them find it themselves. She looked back at her hands. They were shaking, not visibly. She had learned, somewhere in the 14 months since Thomas died, how to shake on the inside, how to press her palms flat against her thighs and let the trembling happen somewhere no one could see it. It was a skill, a terrible one, but useful. The mountains came up slowly, on all sides. Pine trees thick enough to block the afternoon light. Rock faces where the road had been cut directly into the slope, barely wide enough for the coach. The drop, on the right side, a suggestion rather than a boundary. Cold air pushed through the window. She'd left cracked because the inside of the coach smelled like tobacco, and old wool, and something she couldn't identify that made her think of her grandmother's cellar. Not unpleasant, just old. She thought about the advertisement. She had read it so many times in the Dodge City paper that she had it memorized without meaning to. Mountain Man 38, Cimarron Territory, seeks capable woman for household management and property upkeep. Not companionship, work, wages, or arrangement. References through Rev. Silas Pruitt, First Church, Cimarron. She had stared at the word arrangement for a long time. She knew what it meant. In the language men used when they were out of options and trying not to sound like it. She had written back anyway. Because it was not enough time to find something better, and because dignity, she had learned, was a thing that required income to sustain. Without income, it became stubbornness. And stubbornness didn't keep you warm. She was not going to freeze. She had decided that much. The coach stopped at the base of a narrow track that disappeared upward into the trees. "This is as far as I go," the driver said. "Track's too narrow past here." She climbed down with her bag. "Quarter-mile up," the driver said. "Can't miss it. Only building up there." She nodded. "He's a good man," the driver said again, like he was reassuring himself as much as her. She started up the track. The house came into view slowly. First the chimney, a column of pale smoke against the gray sky, then the roof line, then the whole of it. A log structure that had been built by someone who understood how mountains worked. Low and solid, and set into the slope like it had grown there rather than been constructed. It was not beautiful. But it was deliberate. Every piece of it was exactly where it needed to be, and no further. She noticed the left gate post was cracked but still standing. She noticed the kitchen garden had gone to frost-killed weeds. She noticed the front porch boards on the right side had a color that meant soft wood underneath. She had not yet reached the door. The door opened. The man who opened it was tall, angular in the way of someone whose body had been shaped by work rather than intention. Dark hair gone gray at the temples. A jaw that looked like it had been set against saying too much. For so long it had calcified into that position. He looked at her one pass, head to foot. The way you assess terrain before you cross it. Then he looked at her bag. That all of it? Yes. He looked at her again. Then he said it. Can you sew? Her hands were shaking. She pressed them against her skirt. Yes, she said. He turned and went inside. She followed him because she had nowhere else to go, and because the air up here smelled like pineland pot's resin and cold stone, and something that wasn't exactly hope, but was at least the absence of the despair she'd been carrying since Caldwell, and because a woman who had survived 14 months of grief and 3 weeks of legal proceedings was not going to be undone by a man who didn't say welcome. The inside of the house was not what she expected. She had expected rough. She had expected the inside of a place that had been managed by a man alone for 4 years. Dishes in odd places. Surfaces cleared just enough to function. The disorder of someone who had been efficient with the wrong things. And there was some of that. The boots by the door were paired but unlaced, and one had a broken eyelet that had been left unrepaired. The curtains in the front room had been taken down and not replaced, the rods still in place, empty. A chair by the fire had its cushion turned to hide a stain on the front face, but the floor had been swept recently. The dishes on the shelf were stacked with care. The wood beside the fireplace was split to a consistent size and stacked the way someone stacks wood when they have been doing it alone long enough that precision becomes habit rather than effort. This was not a man who had stopped caring. This was a man who had narrowed down what he cared for to the smallest possible number of things, and was maintaining those things with considerable discipline. She was cataloging all of this when he stopped at the kitchen table, and she nearly walked into him. On the table was a document, single page, folded once. Open now. She looked at it without touching it. Then she picked it up and read it. It had Reverend Silas Pruitt's signature at the bottom, and a date. Yesterday's date. Her name was on it. Marin Holst, now Marin Briggs. The transfer of name executed at the office of Rev. Pruitt witnessed and signed. She read it twice, carefully. Then she looked up. Colt Briggs was watching her with the patience of a man who had already worked through every possible response to this moment, and was waiting to see which one she would choose. You signed this before I arrived, she said. I signed the terms, not the person. She read it a third time. The terms were what she would have written herself, if she had been the one drawing them up, the house in either outcome, her name on the property, clear language about the nature of the arrangement, nothing hidden. Nothing soft. She folded it carefully, placed it in the inside pocket of her coat. All right, she said. Something moved across his face. Not quite surprise, not quite relief. The expression of a man who had prepared for negotiation and found none. He picked up her bag before she could reach for it, carried it down the short hall, stopped at a door. Your room, he said, and then he opened it. She stood in the doorway for a moment. This room was small. The mattress was thin, but the ticking was clean. The window faced east. Morning light, she thought automatically. That matters. And then she saw the rest of it. A dress, blue cotton, faded to the color of a winter sky, hanging on a hook near the window. The fabric was old, but it had been hung carefully. Not draped, hung, like something being preserved rather than stored. A brush on the dresser, bone handle. The bristles worn in the middle from use. A small framed photograph on the shelf above the dresser. A woman, young, dark hair pinned up, looking directly at the camera with an expression that was somewhere between amusement and patience. The kind of expression that belongs to someone who has been asked to hold still and is doing so on her own terms. Marin looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she looked at the dress. Then she looked at the brush. She understood he had not moved anything. 4 years since this woman died, and he had not touched a single object in this room. Not because he'd forgotten. Because touching them would mean something he wasn't ready to decide. Colt Briggs was still in the hallway behind her. She did not turn around. She set her canvas bag down on the floor beside the dresser. She reached into the book, took out her needle case, set it on the windowsill, on the east-facing windowsill where the morning light would reach it. She left the brush where it was. She left the dress on the hook. She left the photograph on the shelf. She turned around. 5 o'clock, Colt said. Breakfast. Supper at 6. The ledger's on the kitchen table. The last man who kept it couldn't. I can read accounts, she said. He looked at her the way he had looked at her bag. Assessment, not dismissal. The difference mattered. Breakfast at 5, he said again, and left the doorway. She heard his boots on the floor, the back door, then outside. She sat on the edge of the thin mattress and pressed her hands together and let them shake. Just for a moment. Just a minute and a half of shaking that no one would see. Then she stood up, went to the kitchen table, and opened the ledger. The ledger was a problem, but not the kind she'd expected. She had expected the ledger of a man who didn't care about numbers, who paid what seemed roughly right and moved on, who had been slowly hemorrhaging money in directions too small to notice until they added up to something irreversible. This Russell. This ledger was careful. The handwriting was neat. The columns were aligned. The entries were dated and labeled and cross-referenced. It was meticulous. And it was wrong, not carelessly wrong, systematically wrong, in ways that required you to understand accounts quite well to notice. The interest calculations used the original principal figure rather than the reducing balance, which meant every month the amount calculated was slightly higher than it should have been. Slightly. Not enough to seem obvious. More than enough to matter. She pulled a sheet of paper from the kitchen drawer and began working backward through the numbers. $11 a month, at minimum. Probably more in the early months when the principal was higher. She went further back. 12 months. Maybe further than that. The ledger only went back 3 years to when a man named Silas Fenwick had started keeping it. Before Fenwick, the entries were in a different hand. Rougher. Honest in the way of someone who didn't know enough about accounting to know how to be dishonest with it. The Fenwick entries were something else. She kept going. Found a duplicate payment to a supplier in the 3rd month of Fenwick's records. $18. Same vendor, same amount, same month. 2 separate entry lines. 1 delivery record. She looked for the 2nd delivery record. Found. For nothing. She kept going. A feed invoice marked settled in October of the previous year. No corresponding delivery note in the barn log, which she had found tucked into the back cover of the ledger. Nothing in the hay tallies matched the volume the invoice described. She sat back. The light outside the kitchen window had gone from gray to the pale gold of late afternoon. She had been at the table for 3 hours. She hadn't noticed. She looked at what she had found. 3 things. An interest calculation, running $11 over every month. A duplicate payment of $18 that hadn't bought anything. An invoice for hay that had apparently never arrived. These were not the mistakes of an inattentive man. These were not accidents. She did not say this to herself dramatically. She simply noted it, the way you note the weather, and then she got up and made supper. Salt pork. Dried beans she'd found in the pantry. Cornbread from the last of the meal. Simple. But she built the fire right, and the kitchen filled with the smell of rendered fat and wood smoke, and something coming back to use, and she thought that was worth something even if no one said so. Colt came in at 6 exactly. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He was looking at the stove, at the pot, at the cornbread cooling on the board. The way a man looks at something he had stopped expecting to see. He sat down. She set the plate in front of him. Then she set the ledger on the table between them. Open to the interest page. The $11 discrepancy circled in pencil. She sat down across from him. He looked at the plate. He looked at the ledger. You found something, he said.
3 things,
she said. The one that needs attention first is the land note. Whoever calculated your interest is using the original principal instead of the reducing balance. You've been overpaying by $11 a month, at minimum. Probably for the last 18 months based on when Fenwick started the ledger. He was still. That's your money, she said. You can demand it back or apply it forward as a credit against what's due this quarter. The second option closes faster. He was quiet for a long time. How do you know how to read accounts? My father kept the books for a grain merchant in Ohio. I kept them after him, and after that I kept them for myself and Thomas until she stopped, until I didn't need to anymore. Steady, no pity, no calculation either. Just looking. Eat, she said. He ate, she ate. The silence between them was not comfortable, but it was not hostile. It was the silence of two people sitting at the same table for the first time, still at deciding what the other one was. She washed the dishes. He went back outside. That was the first night. The second morning she found the porch boards. She had known about them since she arrived. That gray soft color at the center was something she had cataloged on arrival, the way she cataloged everything. But knowing about them and stepping through one were different. Experiences. Her foot went through to mid-calf. She caught the rail, stood there for a moment. One foot in the cold air, one caught in splintered wood. The mountain dropped away below the porch in a long slope of pine and stone. The morning was clear and very cold, and smelled of frost, and somewhere distantly of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. She assessed, freed her foot carefully, tested the board beside it, the same soft give. The next one, the next, 4 boards minimum, possibly 5. The rot had been spreading from the inside, which meant it had been coming for 2 seasons at least. She went to the barn. Colt was there. He was at the workbench with a length of harness leather, doing something with an awl and a great deal of patience. He looked up when she came in. The porch needs replacing, she said. Not patching. The rot's structural. 4 boards minimum, possibly 5. Do you have lumber? He set the awl down. Back of the barn. I'll need a pry bar and a hammer. He set the awl down slowly. The kind of quiet that means a man is just deciding, not answering it. I'll do it, he said. I found it, she said. I'll do it. He looked at her, not with irritation, with something she couldn't immediately name. Then he got up, found the pry bar on the wall hook, and carried it to the door of the barn, left it leaning against the frame, went back to his harness. She picked it up. She worked through the morning. Methodical. Pulling the rotted boards with the pry bar, checking the substructure beneath, finding it sound, laying the new boards from the pile at the back of the barn and cutting them to length with the handsaw she'd found hanging beside the lumber. The sun came out properly around 9 o'clock. She rolled her sleeves, pinned her hair back. The mountain was very quiet except for the sound of her hammer, and somewhere below the tree line the occasional call of a bird. She didn't know the name of. She did not know. Until much later, that Colt Briggs came to the barn door twice and stood there watching her work. And both times went back inside without speaking. She drove the last nail at 10:30, sat back on her heels, looked at the 4 new boards, flush and tight, and exactly level, running their full length without a soft spot anywhere. Something loosened in her chest, not relief, larger than relief, the deep, specific satisfaction of a problem correctly solved, the kind that lives in the hands as much as the mind. She had not had a problem she could solve in 14 months. She had had grief and legal language, and a banker who nodded at her citations and told her the outcome wouldn't change. She had had a widow's room in Caldwell with a mattress that was no longer hers, and a collection of condolences from people who looked at her like she was a question they didn't know the answer to. She had not had a porch with bad boards and a pile of good lumber and a hammer. She picked up the tools and took them back to the barn. That evening she told him about the duplicate payment, $18. Same vendor, same month, 2 entries, 1 delivery. He listened the way he did everything. Completely. Without interrupting. You're certain it's a duplicate? He said. Not 2 deliveries? She showed him the barn log. The tallies for that month. The delivery record with the single entry. He was quiet for a long time. I'll write to them, he said. I already drafted the letter, she said. It's on the table. You only need to sign it. He looked at her. Not the assessing look. Not the careful granting of professional trust look. Something different. Something with a wall still in front of it, but a wall that had shifted slightly. The way a door shifts when someone on the other side leans against it. Colt, she said, because she had made a decision about that. Not Mr. Briggs. That was too much distance for people who shared a table, but she would not presume on first name until he offered it, or she needed it. He didn't correct her. He signed the letter. The south window was on the third morning. She found it the way she found everything. By looking, the boarding over the window had been up long enough that the interior sill had warped from moisture trapped underneath. She noticed the discoloration in the wood first, then the slight bow in the boards themselves. She took the boards off, 2 nails, then 4. The glass beneath was intact, which surprised her. She had expected cracking. But the frame was the problem. Swollen at the lower joint, cracked along the seam where the 2 pieces of wood met, the gap wide enough now that cold air was getting through consistently. She examined it for a while. Then she went back to her room and opened the canvas bag. In the bottom of it, wrapped in a piece of old cloth, was a tin of wood glue. She had brought it from the homestead because it had been hers, purchased with her own money the spring before Thomas's health turned. She had refused to leave it for the bank. A small refusal. A stupid one, probably. But it had felt important. She brought the tin to the window, cleaned the joint with a rag, worked the glue in carefully, then opened the needle case and found 2 strips of cotton binding, cut them to length and pressed them flat across the joint in a tight X. It would hold until proper repair. Better than the boarding had done. She was pressing the second strip flat when she heard him behind her. She had not heard him come in. "What are you using?" he said. "Wood glue and binding. It'll set by tonight. The sash needs planing about 1/4 inch along the bottom. The wood's swollen, but it'll close cleanly once the joint holds." He was close enough that she could feel the cold still coming off his coat. She did not turn immediately. Finished pressing the binding flat. "Clara Pot did that," he said. His voice was different, lower, more careful. Like a man who had said something he had not planned to say and was deciding whether to keep going or stop there. She pressed the binding flat. She didn't like the draft, he said. Put those boards up herself. Said she'd fixed the frame in the spring. Marin kept her hands on the binding. "When did she pass?" she said. 4 years ago. Childbed fever. She turned then. He was looking at the window, not at her. His face had the look she was beginning to know. Feeling something. No name for it. Waiting to see what it would cost him to have felt it at all. "I'm sorry," she said. Plainly, without performance, he nodded once. That was all. He walked out of the room. She heard his boots on the new porch boards. Solid now, no give. She listened until the sound reached the barn door and stopped, and then she stood in that room, with the binding drying on the window frame, and thought about a man who had boarded up a drafty window because it was the last thing his wife had touched, and who had then watched the house slowly fall apart around that one preserved gesture. She understood that, not in the way you understand things that have happened to other people. In the precise and specific way that you understand things that have also happened to you. She had kept Thomas's reading glasses on the cast nightstand for 11 of the 14 months. She had moved them finally, not because she wanted to, but because the housekeeper who was no longer the housekeeper once the house was no longer hers had asked what to do with them. And she had not been able to answer. She did not mention Clara again. She pressed the binding flat one more time, left the window to dry, and went back to the ledger. By the end of the first week, she had worked through the accounts to the current month. The interest overpayments were documented. The duplicate payment letter had been sent. The hay invoice discrepancy she was still tracing. She had also on the fourth day climbed into the barn loft. Not because anyone asked her to. Because the amount of feed Coltle was purchasing from the Dodge City supplier did not match what the delivery records showed and did not match what the cattle, based on the herd log, should be consuming. The numbers were off in the wrong direction. More bought than used or stored. which meant either the delivery records were wrong or something was happening to the hay between delivery and use, the loft told her. The eastern section of the floor had never been sealed properly. The seam between the boards gaped in two places, enough that rain and meltwater came through in the right conditions and pooled on the hay bales beneath. She could see the dark staining on the hay, the mold working its way through the bottom third. Of 4 bales she tested with a stick, but $40. She calculated it twice, roughly $40 in wasted hay over the season. Possibly more in seasons before. She climbed back down and went to find Colt. He was splitting wood near the far corner of the property, working with the economy of motion of someone who has done this particular tasks so many times that the body handles it without consulting the mind. He looked up when she came close enough. The loft floor has 2 unsealed seams on the east side, she said. Rain's been getting in and rotting the bottom bales. I estimate $40 lost this season. He set the axe down on the chopping block. How do you know what the herd should be consuming? My father kept draft horses before the grain business. I counted bales from the time I was tall enough to see over the stack. He looked at her, that look again, the one she had started to recognize. Not the professional assessment look. This was the one where he was finding another room in a house he thought he knew the layout of. A man repeatedly encountering evidence that something he thought he understood is considerably larger than he realized. How many more of those do you have? He said. Problems in the accounts? Yes, 1 more. Possibly 2. I'm still tracing the hay invoice. He picked up the axe. Come inside after supper, he said. There's something I need you to look at. She went back across the field. The pine trees moved in the wind above the property line. Below the ridge, the valley was going gold with the last of the afternoon, the light the color of old honey. She thought about what he'd said. There's something I need you to look at. Not I have something to show you. Need, the word. From a man who had spent 4 years operating under the apparently fixed belief that he didn't need anything from anyone. She went back to the kitchen and started supper. He brought out the document after they'd eaten, a folded paper, handled many times. The paper had the softness of a page turned over too many times to count. He set it on the table between them without explanation, and she picked it up and read it by the lamp and did not speak for several minutes. It was a promissory note, held by a man named Denton Vare. The note was for the South Parcel. The amount was significant. The due date was 60 days from now. She read it carefully, twice. This note has a renewal clause, she said. Paragraph 4, second section. Written notice of intent to renew delivered before the due date with a witness constitutes valid exercise of the renewal option. He told me the clause was invalidated, Colt said. Verbally. Said I'd forfeited it with the late payment last spring. She looked up. Did he put that in writing? No, he said it at the property line. Was anyone else present? His man. Hired. She looked back at the document. The verbal claim has no legal weight against the written terms, she said. The clause stands exactly as it's written. A late payment creates a late fee at the rate specified in paragraph 3. It does not invalidate a separately negotiated renewal option. Colt was very still. He told me I had no choice but to pay the full balance at due date, or accept his offer on the parcel. And his offer? 30 cents on the dollar. She set the document down on the table, pressed it flat with both hands. He's been misrepresenting the terms, she said. Either he doesn't know the law, which I doubt, or he's calculating that you don't. 30 cents, Colt said again, quietly, like a man doing arithmetic in his head for the first time and not liking where the numbers go. I can draft the notice of intent to renew tonight, she said. It needs to be delivered to Vare's office before the due date with a witness present. Reverend Pruitt would serve. Pruitt, Colt said. Yes. He's known Vare since Vare came to the territory. Good. A credible witness matters. She was already pulling the paper toward her. I'd recommend you deliver it in person, not by post. Post can be mislaid. He looked at her for a long moment. I'll take it myself, he said. I'd recommend taking me with you, she said. I can answer his legal objections on the spot. He'll have them. Silence. Outside the wind was picking up. the pine trees moving, cold air finding the gap under the kitchen door and making the lamp flame lean slightly east. He looked at her across the table, at the document she was already reaching for, at the lamp between them. "All right," he said. She pulled the paper toward her and picked up the pen. She almost said something. A reassurance. She caught herself. He had not asked for reassurance, he had asked for competence. Those were different things, she wrote. He refilled his coffee and sat down and watched her write, and the kitchen was warm from the stove, and the wind moved through the pine trees outside with a sound that was almost like water, and neither of them spoke. She heard him that night, not in the room, moving past it, down the hall. The front door opened, closed. She lay still and listened to the wind. She got up, put on her shawl, and went to the kitchen window. He was standing on the porch, on the new boards she had laid, looking out toward the south pasture, toward the tree line where the south parcel began. His shoulders, set the way they were when he was working through something he couldn't resolve by working. She watched him. A man standing in the cold at 2 a.m, looking at land he'd been told he was going to lose. A man who 2 years ago had been offered a way out and refused it because he had not, at that point, wanted to be saved. Something about that. She couldn't settle on what it was exactly. Too large to look at directly. The way certain things are, she went back to bed. She did not know, lying there, listening to the wind, that he stood on the porch for another 20 minutes. That he looked at the boards beneath his feet, at the flush nail heads and the tight joins and the absence of that soft give that bad wood makes under a man's weight. That he had noticed sometime in those 20 minutes that the window of the south-facing room at the end of the hall was no longer boarded, that there was a faint line of lamplight under the kitchen door that had not been there in 4 years. She didn't know any of that, but she stayed awake until she heard the front door open and close again. His boots in the hall, his door. Then she let herself sleep. The ledger was still on the table in the morning. She was at it before 5, before the stove was properly lit, wrapped in her shawl with a candle, because the lamp needed oil she was saving. She was looking at Silas Fenwick's entries again. Fenwick had kept the ledger for 3 years. Starting from the Svafalandvar had offered Colt the land note. Neat handwriting, careful columns, and running underneath all of it, like a current beneath still water, a set of small errors that were not errors at all. She had not yet said the word she was thinking. She said it now, quietly, to herself in the pre-dawn kitchen of a house on a mountain. Deliberate. The errors were deliberate. She looked at the name on the early ledger entries. Fenwick. S. Fenwick. She thought about Denton Vare. About a man who had come to the Cimarron territory 11 years ago with capital and a plan and had been converting other people's difficulties into acreage ever since. If Ruth Canby's careful not quite statements were to be believed, she thought about the specific usefulness of having someone keep a man's accounts for him. Quietly, carefully, creating conditions for a difficulty the man wouldn't see coming until it was 60 days from his door. She picked up her pencil, she wrote S. Fenwick. Relation. To Vare. And then she wrote below it, find out. Outside the sky was beginning to lighten above the eastern ridge. The pine trees turned from black to green in the growing light. Somewhere, below the tree line, the bird she didn't know the name of started again. She got up, built the fire, started breakfast. When Colt came in at 5, he found the table clear, the stove hot, the coffee. He sat down. She set a plate in front of him. He looked at it, at her. At the ledger now closed on the counter. You were up early, he said. I had something to check. He drank his coffee. What did you find? She hesitated, not because she doubted, because there was a right way to say this and she was making sure she had it. Fenwick, she said. The man who kept your accounts before me. Do you know if he has any connection to Vare? Colt set his cup down. He was very still. Why? He said, because the errors in the ledger are not errors, she said. They are consistent, systematic, in the direction that benefits the lender. That requires either extraordinary incompetence or a reason. He looked at her for a long moment. The morning light was coming through the east window now. The window that had been boarded 4 years ago and was open again. It came across the kitchen table and lay across the ledger and across his hands and across the space between them. Fenwick, he said. He came to me through Vere. Vere recommended him. She nodded. She had known that was what he was going to say. All right, she said, and went back to making breakfast. He watched her. She was not certain what he was thinking. But she thought it might have something to do with the shape of a thing you've been living inside of and couldn't see. Clearly because you were too close to its walls. And what it feels like when someone hands you the structure of it from the outside, you can finally see what it is. She didn't say anything else about Fenwick. She didn't need to. The document on the counter, drafted the night before, said most of what needed to be said. The rest could wait for Vere's office 60 days. Enough time. She had worked with less. She found the connection on a Thursday, not dramatically. Not the way things happen in stories where the revelation arrives with thunder and consequence. She found it the way she found most things. By looking carefully at something everyone else had stopped looking at, the ledger. Again. Third time through the Fenwick entries. She had been cross-referencing the supplier invoices against the delivery records in the barn log. A slow process. Methodical. The kind of work that requires you to hold 3 numbers in your head simultaneously while your hand writes a 4th. She had been doing it since before the sun came up. The coffee had gone cold twice, and there it was. A notation in the margin of the October entry, small, almost not there. Written in pencil, so light it had nearly faded. Per DV, adjust Q3 carry forward. DV, Denton Vere. She set her pencil down, sat back, looked at the notation for a long time. Not an error. Not an oversight. An instruction. Silas Fenwick had adjusted the accounts on instruction from Denton Vere and had noted it, either carelessly or because he expected no one capable of reading accounts to ever open this ledger again, which meant the errors were not errors, which meant the overpayments were not accidents, which meant Colt Briggs had been paying a man who was simultaneously instructing his gear to ensure he kept paying. She picked up her pencil, wrote, October marginal notation. Fenwick received direct instruction from D. Vere to adjust Q3 figures. Written evidence, original ledger, underlined it. Then she closed the ledger, set it in the center of the table where Colt would see it when he came in, and went to make breakfast. She did not tell him immediately. This was a choice, not avoidance, strategy. A man like Colt Briggs. She had learned in 8 days of observation, processed information better when he had time and a task. Telling him at breakfast when he was 2 hours into his morning work, and his mind was already set on the day's shape, would get her a wall. Telling him at supper when the day's work was finished, and the kitchen was warm, and his hands were around a cup, would get her the man. So she said nothing at breakfast. He noticed the ledger in the center of the table, looked at it, looked at her. She handed him his plate. He ate. The morning passed. She worked on the kitchen garden. The frost had taken everything, but the soil was still workable, and she had found seeds in the back of the pantry cabinet. Sage, thyme, 2 varieties of hardy onion that had not been planted and would not keep another winter. She turned the beds with the small spade from the barn, broke clods, raked the surface level. The mountain was very quiet. The sky overhead was the hard, bright blue of late autumn at altitude. Her breath made small clouds. Her hands moved. She thought about Fenwick's notation. She thought about Denton Vere. She thought about a man who had arrived in this territory 11 years ago, with capital and a plan, and who had been, if Ruth Canby's careful circumlocutions could be trusted, converting other people's misfortunes into acreage, with a consistency that suggested the misfortunes were not entirely accidental. She planted the onion sets in a straight line. The letter from Hargrove arrived that afternoon, a writer from town. Young man with the discomfort of someone who knew what was in the envelope and wanted no part of it. He handed it to Marin because she was the one who came to the door. Colt's name on the front. Handwriting she didn't recognize. She took it inside and set it beside the ledger. She did not open it. Not her letter, but she looked at the return notation on the back flap. Hargrove and Associates, attorneys at law. On behalf of D. Vere. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put water on for coffee and waited for Colt. He came in just after 5, saw the ledger, saw her face, which she had kept deliberately neutral, because the expression she actually wanted to make was not useful to anyone. He picked up the letter. Read it standing at the counter. Didn't sit down. Read it twice. Set it down, Hargrove, he said. I saw the return address, Vere's attorney. He's been the territory's best for 20 years. She refilled her coffee cup, held it with both hands. May I? He pushed the letter across the counter. She read it 4 pages. Dense. The language of a man who wanted to appear reasonable while constructing a wall. The core argument was this. The late payment of the previous spring had constituted a breach of the note's terms, and that breach had, in the attorney's reading, invalidated the renewal clause as a matter of the note's internal structure. The attorney cited a case from Missouri, 1871. She read the Missouri citation twice, then she set the letter down. He's citing an 1871 Missouri case, she said. I gathered, Colt said. I don't know what that means. It means his attorney is either lazy or betting you won't check. She pulled the letter back toward her. Missouri property law diverged from this territory's framework in 1879 when the Homestead Act extension was implemented. The 1871 case he's citing has no standing here. The precedent simply doesn't apply. Colt was looking at her with that look, the one she had stopped trying to categorize. You're certain? My father argued a similar point with a grain merchant in Columbus when I was 17. I sat through 4 hours of legal correspondence on the subject. Yes, I'm certain, he was quiet. There's something else, she said. She got up and brought the ledger from the table, opened it to October, set it in front of him and pointed to the notation. He leaned forward, eyed it, his jaw set. A man who had been doing arithmetic in his head and had just arrived at a number he didn't want. Per DV, he said, Fenwick was operating on Vere's instructions. The ledger errors were not negligence. They were deliberate. She paused cold. Vere recommended Fenwick to you. Yes. The man he recommended to keep your accounts was working for him. While keeping your accounts, silence. The lamp between them made a small sound. The wick needed trimming, so the overpayments, he said, went to the lender whose man was ensuring they continued. Yes. He sagged back. She let him sit with it. Didn't fill the silence. The silence had a shape and a weight, and it needed to exist before anything else could. How long? He said finally. 3 years. Since Fenwick started the ledger. Which was the same month Vere offered you the note on the south parcel. He looked at the ceiling, the log beams above them. The work of a man who had built this house himself, she had understood from the first week. Every joint fitted by hand. Every beam squared by eye. 3 years, he said. At minimum, he stood up, went to the window, stood there looking out at the dark. Not the heavy stillness of a man who has given up. The coiled stillness of a man deciding what to do next. She waited. What do we do? He said. Not what can be done. Not what should I do. We. The word landed differently than he probably intended it to. We respond to the attorney's letter, she said, citing the 1879 precedent specifically and by statute. We deliver the notice of intent to renew to Vere's office before the due date with Reverend Pruitt as witness. And we document the Fenwick notation and the pattern of errors in a separate summary which we hold. Hold for what? In case we need to demonstrate a pattern, she said, to a judge or to Reverend Pruitt, or to anyone else who might find it useful to know that Denton Vere has been conducting himself this way. He turned from the window. You think he's done this before? I think a man with this much method doesn't develop it on one property. She paused. I think we should find out. He looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was warm. Outside the wind was beginning, the pines moving on the ridge, the sound of it coming down the slope in waves. All right, he said. She picked up the pen. She wrote the response letter in 2 drafts. The first draft was too sharp. Good law, but too much satisfaction in the delivery. A letter that sounds like it's winning, sounds like someone who's afraid they might not. She put it aside. The second draft was better, precise, measured. citing the 1879 statute by name and next section, noting the specific inapplicability of the Missouri 1871 precedent, affirming the renewal clause as standing in terms that left no interpretive room, and at the end, a single sentence, professionally worded, noting that a comprehensive review of the property accounts had surfaced several discrepancies meriting further examination, not a threat, a fact, stated as one. She read it to Colt after supper. He listened the way he listened to everything, completely. Without expression, the last line, he said, "Yes, is that going to make him move faster? Possibly," she said. "But it also changes the nature of what he's doing. Right now he believes this is a private matter between him and an isolated man who doesn't understand his own contracts. The moment he knows someone is reviewing the accounts, the picture changes. He might come here. He might." She folded the letter. "I'd rather have him here than at the county office without us knowing." Colt thought about it. The way he thought about everything. "All the way down. Send it," he said. She set the letter beside the door for morning. Ruth Canby came on Saturday. She came the way she always seemed to do things, without announcement and without apology for the lack of it. A jar of preserved peaches in one hand. A look in her eye that said she had seen something she wanted a closer view of. She set the peaches on the counter without being asked where they went, which told Marin exactly how many times Ruth Canby had stood in this kitchen. "Sit down," Marin said, because Ruth was going to anyway, and it was easier to be the one who offered it. Ruth sat. Looked around the kitchen the way a person looks at a room they've known a long time and are checking for changes. The curtain rods were still empty. The floor was swept. The ledger, closed, sat on the shelf where Marin had begun keeping it. And then Ruth looked at her. "You've been busy," Ruth said. There was a great deal to do. There always was. Ruth accepted the coffee Marin poured. Colt used to do what needed doing and nothing else, which is one way to keep a house. "It's a functional approach," Marin said. Ruth almost smiled. "You're being generous. I'm being accurate." Ruth smiled, fully then, set her cup down. "He came to see me 3 weeks before he put the advertisement in the paper." Marin looked up. "He didn't tell me he was going to do it," Ruth said. "He came to ask if I thought it was a reasonable idea." She paused. "Which is the most words he said to me in 2 years." Marin waited. "I told him it depended on the woman." Ruth picked up her cup again. "I told him what he needed wasn't someone to cook for him. He's been cooking for himself. What he needed was someone to remind him what the cooking was for." The kitchen was quiet, somewhere outside. The wind moved through the pine trees on the ridge. He asked the right question. Marin said. At the door, Ruth tilted her head. "He asked if I could sew," Marin said. Ruth looked at her for a long moment. Understanding something, Marin thought, that she herself was still finding the edges of. "He's got his father's jaw," Ruth said finally. "And his father never did learn to ask for help until whatever he needed help with was already past saving." She paused. "Colt nearly waited that long too." Marin said nothing. Because what was there to say to that? It was simply true, and they both knew it. Ruth stayed an hour. She talked about the Halverson fence repairs, about the creek dropping in August, about the family named Pratt, 3 miles east, whose husband had just that month signed over the north section of their property to Denton Vare. Who had not, Ruth observed, in the particular tone she used, things she found unacceptable, received a fair price. Marin listened with 2 parts for mind, one part tracking what Ruth was saying, the other part filing it. Pratt. North section. Vare. The Pratts, she said. How long had they held that note? 3 years, Ruth said. 3 years. Same as Colt's note. Who kept their accounts? Marin said. Ruth set down her cup. Looked at Marin with the full attention of a woman who had been wondering when someone would get to that particular question. A man named Fenwick. Ruth said. Marin was still. Silas Fenwick, Ruth said. Came to the territory right around when Vare arrived. Does a great deal of work for Vare's associates? The fire in the stove made a small sound. How many families has Fenwick worked for? Marin said. That I know of. Ruth considered. Pratt. Halverson, the Dewey family over the North Ridge. And you're sitting in a 4th 4 properties. 4 sets of accounts, the same man, instructed by the same other man, over 3 years. She thought about what that looked like from above, from the outside, from the position of someone who had planned it. She thought about who would want 4 parcels of mountain land badly enough to plan 3 years of careful arithmetic for it. She thought about the Cimarron territory, about the valley below, about the fact that she had noticed on the ride up from Dodge City that the valley floor would make an excellent route for something long and straight that needed flat ground and reliable grades. She did not say this to Ruth, but she wrote that evening after Ruth had gone and Colt was in the barn. Fenwick has worked for Pratt, Halverson, Dewey, Briggs. All mountain properties, all notes held by Vare, all same time period. Ask, what does Vare want the land for? She went to town on Monday. Colt had supplies to collect. She offered to go with him, then realized he was going to the sawmill on the far side of the property, and suggested she go to town alone. He looked at her for a moment. You know the way? I watched the road on the way up. He handed her the list of supplies and the wagon without another word. The town of Cimarron was small. 1 main street, a general store, a post office, a church, Pruitt's, white-painted exact, a land office with a sign she noted as she passed. She collected the supplies, salt, nails, thread, lamp oil, and then she went to the land office, not because she had planned to, because the question she'd written down the night before had been sitting in the back of her mind the whole drive down the mountain, and the land office was right there, and the door was open. The clerk was a young man with ink on his fingers, and the eager manner of someone who did not often get visitors. I'm looking for information about survey activity in the territory, she said. In the last 2 years, the clerk blinked. Survey activity, railroad surveys, she said, or land option filings. Large acreage, he blinked again, and then his expression did something, a small shift. The look of a person who has been told not to discuss something and has just been asked about it directly. I can't really speak to. Who filed the options, she said. Ma'am. Was it Vare? Silence. The clerk looked at his desk, at his ink-stained hands. At the door behind her, as if checking whether someone was watching. The options were filed through a holding company, he said, finally. Very quietly. 12 months ago. The name on the filing is Eastern Mountain Land and Transit, but the local representative of record is… He stopped. Denton Vare. She said. He said nothing, which was enough. She thanked him. Collected her supplies from the wagon. Drove back up the mountain. Her hands were steady on the reins. Perfectly steady. The kind of steady that comes not from calm, but from the absolute clarity of knowing exactly what you are looking at. Not a man who wanted to buy cheap land for the profit of it. A man who was assembling a specific collection of parcels, mountain properties, in a specific configuration, on behalf of a company whose name included the word transit. 4 families. 3 years. The same bookkeeper. The same lender. The same offer at 30 cents on the dollar. And somewhere on the eastern side of the territory, a railroad company that needed a route through the mountains. She drove up the narrow track into the pine trees. The house came into view. Colt was at the fence line on the east pasture. He looked up when he heard the wagon, raised a hand, went back to the fence. She unhitched the wagon, put the supplies away. Then she sat at a kitchen table with a piece of paper and wrote down everything in the order she had found it, carefully, precisely, the way her father had taught her to write up an account. Every figure in its place. No assumption without a source. When she was done, she had 3 pages. She read them back. Corrected 2 words. Added a date to the land office entry. Then she folded the pages and put them in the inner pocket of her coat where she kept the marriage document. Some things you carry close, she told him at supper. All of it. In order. He did not interrupt. He ate through the first part, then set his fork down and did not pick it up again. She finished. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the wind had come up properly now. The real mountain wind that arrived in the evenings and moved through the pine trees, with enough force to make the house settle and shift against it. A railroad, he said, a route through the mountains. The valley below this ridge would be nearly ideal. Low gradient, navigable terrain, access to the eastern passes. She paused. He's not buying land, he's clearing a right-of-way. And he's been doing it for 3 years. Colt sat with that, the other families, he said. Pratt, Halverson, they didn't know, same as you didn't know. He picked up his fork, put it down again. Halverson sold 8 months ago. I know, Pratt sold last month. I know. That leaves Dewey and us, she said. He looked at her. The lamp threw a long shadow across the table between them. His face was doing the thing it did when he was feeling something that had no established name in his vocabulary. The jaw, the stillness. A man who had always worked alone, and was now quietly deciding if that was still what he wanted. What do we do? He said. Again that word, we do what we were already going to do, she said. We deliver the renewal notice. We answer the attorney's letter. We keep the property. She folded her hands on the table. But we also take a copy of what I've written to Reverend Pruitt. And I think we should let the Dewey family know what we found. He thought about that. Dewey will want proof. I have the land office filing, the ledger, the Fenwick notation. The pattern of accounts across 4 properties, she paused. It's not a court case, but it's enough to make a man think twice before he signs over his land. Colt looked at her across the table. A long look, the kind that has nothing assessment left in it. When did you find all of this? He said. The Fenwick notation, 8 days ago. The land office filing, today. The pattern across the 4 properties I've been building since Ruth told me about the Pratts. You've been building this? Yes. Without saying, I needed to be certain before I said it to you. It would have been unfair to raise it before I could show you the whole shape. He was quiet. The fire in the stove made a sound. Oh, my father, he said. Slowly. Like a man choosing something from a high shelf. He was the same way, quiet until he was certain. Then he'd say the whole thing at once, and you'd wonder how long he'd been carrying it. She did not know what to do with that, so she said nothing. My wife too, he said. Clara, she'd work something out in her head for 3 days, and then tell me the answer without the working. The kitchen was very still. She had not heard him say Clara's name in the ordinary run of conversation. In the present tense of something remembered, rather than the past tense of something lost, she sounds like she was sharp, Marin said carefully. Sharpest person I've known. He picked up his coffee. Until recently, he said it to the cup. Not to her, but she heard it. Denton Vare came on a Wednesday. He came in the mid-morning, which was deliberate. A man who arrives at mid-morning has calculated that the other man will be in the middle of work, distracted, slightly off balance, more likely to agree to something in order to get back to what he was doing. Marin was in the kitchen when she heard the wagon. She looked out the window, good coat, good hat. And beside him on the wagon seat, she didn't recognize, large, still, not a laborer's stillness, a hired stillness, a man paid to be present and visible, something about that. She did not go to the door immediately. She went to the shelf, got the marriage document, the attorney's response letter, and the 3 pages she had written, folded them together, put them in her apron pocket. Then she went to the door. Colt was already coming from the direction of the east fence. He had seen the wagon. His face was the face he used fit for weather and broken equipment and things that needed to be handled. Vare climbed down with the ease of a man who had done this particular arrival many times. Briggs, he said pleasantly. I was in the area. You're never in this area, Colt said. A small pause. Vare smiled. Fair point. I came about the note. The due date is in 3 weeks. Yes, and I wanted to discuss the terms before that became urgent. Vare's eyes moved to Marin at the door, moved over her briefly, returned to Colt. I wanted to make a final offer on the south parcel. Given the circumstances, Colt said. The late payment last spring. The renewal clause question. I want to resolve this amicably, Briggs. I always have. The renewal clause isn't a question, Marin said. She said it from the doorway, clearly. The cold air carrying it across the yard without difficulty. Vare looked at her. Really looked, this time. The brief recalibration of a man encountering something he had not anticipated. Mrs. Briggs, he said. The renewal clause is paragraph 4, section 2, she said. Written notice of intent to renew, delivered before the due date with a witness present, constitutes valid exercise of the option. We're delivering that notice today. I have a copy for your records." She came down the porch steps, held out the envelope. He did not take it immediately. The clause was addressed verbally, he said. "Due to the spring payment issue, name the witnesses," she said, in writing, with dates. "I'll wait." The large man on the wagon seat shifted slightly. Vere's jaw moved. She looked at him with the expression she had developed. Over 14 months of probate proceedings and bankers' meetings and legal language, designed to make her feel like she had understood something she hadn't for exactly this type of conversation. Polite, attentive, absolutely immovable. "Your wife seems to be speaking for you, Briggs," Vere said. The contempt in the word wife. She noted it, did not react to it. "She speaks well," Colt said. "Flat, final. I'll let her." Vere looked at the envelope. He looked at Colt's face. He looked at the large man on the wagon seat, who was providing no assistance because there was nothing for him to provide assistance with. There was a woman standing in a yard holding an envelope, and a man standing beside her, and neither of them was moving. "I'll need to have my attorney review the notice," Vere said. "Of course," she said. "I've also prepared a summary of the account discrepancies from the property ledger, covering the past 3 years of entries under Mr. Fenwick's management. The summary notes several systematic errors that benefited the lender." She took the folded pages from her apron pocket. "Your attorney will find it useful context." Vere looked at the pages. He was very still. "I've also given a copy to Reverend Pruitt," she said, "for safekeeping. The pleasant surface of him did something underneath, not visibly, not in any way she could point to afterward, but the temperature of him changed. She felt it the way you feel a change in the air before weather. "I see you've been busy," he said. "There was a great deal to review," she said. He took the envelope. He took the pages. He held them the way a man holds things he did not expect to be holding. "I'll be in touch, Briggs," he said. He turned the wagon. They watched it go. The dust settled on the downhill track, thinning between the pine trees. And then the wagon was gone, and the sound of it with it, and there was only the wind and the birds, and the solid ground underfoot. "Reverend Pruitt," Colt said. "When did you give him a copy?" "Yesterday morning while you were at the sawmill," she said. "I left a copy at the church and asked him to hold it." He looked at her. "I told you I thought we should. You did. I thought it was important to have it in a neutral place before Vere's man came to look at the accounts. His man, Fenwick, still has a key to the barn log." "I found the impression in the book last week," she said it simply. "I changed the lock." He stared at her. "When?" "Last Thursday. I found a spare padlock in the barn. Same manufacturer. Fenwick's key won't fit it?" She paused. "I was going to tell you. You were going to tell me. I was waiting until I had the rest of it in order." He looked at her for a long moment. The mountain around them was very quiet. The pine trees moved. The sky above the ridge was the deep blue of midday at altitude. A hawk circled once over the east pasture and tilted away on the wind. And Colt Briggs did something she had not seen him do in the 12 days she had known him. He laughed. Not a large laugh. Not a performance of it. A short, involuntary sound. The kind that escapes when something has been wound very tight for a very long time, and something else has, without asking permission, let just a small amount of the tension out. He turned away, looked at the ridge. She looked at the track where the wagon had gone. "The Dewey family," she said. "We should go to them before Vere does. Day after tomorrow," he said. "Tuesday. I'll take you." The first time he had offered to take her anywhere. "All right," she said. She went back inside. Behind her she heard him stand there for another moment in the yard before he went back to the fence. That evening she was in the parlor. She was restitching the split-seam the chair. His chair. The one he sat in every night with his coffee. The cushion had been held together for some time. She had noticed it in the first week. And the seam along the left side was finally coming apart at the back. She was working by the light from the stove. Not the lamp. The lamplight was better for close work, but the firelight was enough. And there was something about the near dark that allowed her to think without thinking. He came in from the barn. She heard the door. His boots. He came down the hall. Stopped in the parlor doorway. She did not look up. "The seam was going," she said. Another week and the cushion would have split completely. He did not speak. She kept working. Clara made that cushion, he said. She stopped, looked up at him. He was in the doorway, still in his coat. The lamplight from the hall behind him. I know, she said. The stitch pattern on the back panel is hand-done. The tension's consistent. It's good work. She turned the cushion and showed him the repair on the seam. Invisible, unless you were looking for it. Matching thread. Matching tension, it will hold now, she said. He crossed the room, took the cushion from her, looked at it in the light. His face was doing the thing, the controlled tightening of a man feeling something he has no protocol for. Thank you, he said. It cost him something. She could hear the cost of it. I didn't do it for gratitude, she said gently. I did it because it was worth saving. He looked at her, not at the cushion, at her. And something happened in that moment that neither of them named, and both of them felt. She looked back at her sewing. He set the cushion on the chair and sat down, in it. He did not go back to the barn. That was new. He sat with his coffee. She finished the seam. The lamp burned between them. The stove made small sounds, and neither of them spoke. And both of them knew that something had changed without being able to say when or what exactly it had become. She found him on the porch at midnight. She had not been able to sleep. Not for any dramatic reason. The numbers in her head, the land office filing, the shape of the thing she was looking at, and trying to see all the way around. She got up, put on her shawl, went to the kitchen. He was outside. She could see him through the window, standing on the porch in the cold, looking south. The same posture she had seen the first night, but different. The first night it had been the posture of a man who had forgotten how to come inside. Tonight it was something else. She went to the door. He heard her. Didn't turn. Couldn't sleep either. Numbers, she said. Land, they stood there. The sky was enormous. Clear and cold and salted with stars, the Milky Way a visible smear above the ridge. Below the tree line, the valley was dark and quiet. The south pasture lay silver in the starlight, the fence lines she had been watching him repair running straight across it. He's going to come back, Colt said. Yes, lawyers. Next time. Better ones, probably. And when that doesn't work, she thought about it. He needs the land more than he's letting on. The railroad filing has a timeline, which means he's patient, which means when the legal approach doesn't work, he'll try something else. She paused. But we know the shape of it now. That changes things. He was quiet. You've been carrying this alone a long time, she said. He turned then. Looked at her the way you look at something you've been holding at arm's length, because looking at it directly meant deciding something. Marin, he said the first time. Just her name. Nothing attached to it. Like a man who needed to say it out loud before he could say anything else. But he didn't say anything else. He looked back at the south pasture, and she stood beside him in the cold for a while. The wind moved through the dry grass at the edge of the pasture with a sound like something settling. Above them, the sky was enormous and sharp and indifferent. And there, in every direction, which was its own kind of reassurance, she was still in it. The world. She was still in it. And there was work to do. And she was the person who knew how to do it. She went inside first. She heard him follow a few minutes later. The house was warm. She went back to her room, picked up the ledger, opened it. The numbers looked back at her. She began to work. The Dewey farm was 3 miles north. Colt knew the way without thinking about it. Not from maps. From years of moving through the same terrain, until the terrain became something his body understood before his mind caught up. Marin sat beside him on the wagon. She had brought the 3 pages, the ledger summary, the land office notation, folded in her coat pocket next to the marriage document, which she still carried, both of them close. Both of them important for different reasons. She hadn't fully sorted yet. The track north ran along the ridge line. Pine trees on both sides. Below them, through gaps in the trees, the valley floor was visible. Long and flat, and running east to west in exactly the configuration she had been thinking about since Monday. She looked at it as they passed. A railroad through that valley would need to come from the east, would need to climb gradually, would need at some point to negotiate the mountain grade. And the best way to do that, the most direct route, ran straight through the south parcel of the Briggs property. She looked at it for a long time. Colt did not speak, which was fine. She wasn't ready to speak either. Eldon Dewey was a man of about 50 with the patient, weathered quality of someone who had been farming at altitude long enough that difficulty had stopped being a surprise and had become simply the texture of things. He came out when he heard the wagon. His wife, a small woman with red-chapped hands, appeared in the doorway behind him and stayed there. "Briggs," Dewey said. "Dewey," Colt climbed down. "This is my wife. She's been reviewing the property accounts." Dewey looked at Marin, not dismissively, with the careful attention of a man who has learned to evaluate things correctly, because the cost of evaluating them incorrectly is too high. "You've had trouble with the accounts?" Marin said. It was not a question. Dewey was quiet for a moment. "Come inside," he said. They sat at the Dewey kitchen table, which was larger than Colt's, and had the marks of children on it, initials and old cuts, covered now by a cloth, which told her something about the stakes of this conversation that the words hadn't yet. She laid the 3 pages on the table. She explained it the way she had explained everything, in order, with sources. The Fenwick notation, the land office filing, the pattern across 4 properties, Eastern Mountain land in transit. Dewey listened. His wife came to stand beside him partway through, put her hand on his shoulder, stayed. When Marin finished, the kitchen was quiet. "A railroad," Dewey said. "The valley below the ridge," she said. "Vare needs a right-of-way through the mountain properties to access the eastern passes. Your north section and our south parcel are the 2 remaining pieces he doesn't hold." Dewey looked at the pages. "Fenwick kept our accounts for 2 years, he said. "I know. Recommended by Vare's man in town. I know that too." Dewey looked at his wife, one of those looks that married people have, that contains more than it shows. "We've had 3 visits from Vare in the last 6 months, Dewey said. "Every time the offer gets lower. Because he thinks you're running out of options," Marin said. "He's creating the conditions for it and then offering to resolve them. Can we stop him?" She folded her hands on the table. "You can do what we're doing. Deliver the renewal notice before the due date with a witness. Document the account errors. Keep the paper trail." She paused. "I'd recommend you get your own accounting reviewed. Independently. Someone with no connection to Vare. That's you," Dewey said. "I'm not a professional accountant," she said. "You found all of this." She did not argue the point, because the truth would she knew she could do it. But offering felt different from being asked. Being asked had a weight to it that she wanted to sit with before she answered. "Let me look at what you have," she said. "I'll tell you what I find," Dewey nodded. His wife went to the shelf and brought down a ledger. She spent 2 hours at the Dewey table. Colt sat with Eldon Dewey on the porch. She could hear their voices occasionally, low. The rhythm of 2 men talking about land and weather, and the kind of things that men who work the same terrain find in common without trying. She worked through the Dewey ledger, Fenwick's handwriting. Same neat columns, same systematic errors, same marginal notation in October, different year. Per DV, different property. Same hand, same instruction. She documented everything. The same categories she had used for Colt's ledger, overpayments, duplicate entries, invoices without corresponding delivery records. When she was done, she had 4 more pages. She set them on the table beside her own 3. 7 pages total. A pattern is a single thread pulled. 7 pages is a rope. She folded them carefully, separated the Dewey pages from her own, gave Eldon Dewey his copies when she came back outside. "The overpayments on your note total approximately $43 over 18 months, she said. "The most urgent thing is the renewal. After that, the documentation." Dewey held the pages, looked at them, looked at her. "How much does Colt pay you?" he said. She blinked. "I mean, no disrespect. I mean, to ask if you'd be willing to look at other accounts in the area for pay. Because there are at least 4 families I know of who've been losing sleep over Vare and Fenwick and don't know why." She looked at him. She had not thought about that. Not in this form. She had been thinking about the immediate problem, about the notice of renewal. about the attorney's letter, about the due date that was now 17 days away. She had not thought about what came after. "Let me get through the next 3 weeks," she said. "Then we'll talk." On the drive home, Colt was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dewey asked if you'd look at others' accounts. You heard that. I have good ears." She looked at the valley below the ridge. The afternoon light on it, long and gold and reaching. "Would you mind?" she said. He thought about it. Properly. Not like a quick answer. "No," he said. "I wouldn't mind." And then, because apparently that was settled, the notice needs to go to Vare's office by the end of the week. "Thursday," she said. "Reverend Pruitt is available Thursday afternoon." He confirmed when I left the copy. Colt looked at her sideways. "You confirmed that already Tuesday morning, when I left the copy. Before Vare came." Before Vare came, he shook his head, not in frustration, in the direction of something that was not quite amusement and was becoming a more familiar expression on his face. "All right," he said. Thursday. The second letter from Hargrove arrived on Wednesday. 6 pages this time, which meant one of two things. Either Hargrove had found more legal ground to stand on, or he had found none and was compensating with volume. She read it at the kitchen table with her coffee. Volume. He had abandoned the Missouri 1871 argument, which she had expected. What she had not expected was the new line of attack, which was considerably more creative. Hargrove was now arguing that the marriage document itself, being filed after the initial note terms were established, constituted a material change in the property's legal standing, and that this change required renegotiation of the note terms before any renewal option could be exercised. She read it twice, then she read it a third time very slowly. It was clever. It was entirely wrong, but it was clever enough that it would take someone who understood the 1879 Territorial Property Statute very precisely to explain why. She got up, put more water on for coffee, sat back down. The argument depended on a reading of the Marriage Property Clause that applied under the old Missouri framework, but had been explicitly superseded in this territory. She knew this because she had looked up the territorial statute herself 3 weeks ago when she was reviewing the original note terms and had thought at the time that it was good to know. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper begging to write. The response took her 2 hours, not because she was uncertain, because she was certain and wanted every sentence to show it. Precision without arrogance. The legal equivalent of standing in a doorway and being absolutely immovable, without making a sense or callous or movement. When she was done, she read it back. Good better than good. She set it beside the door. Colt read it that evening. He read it the way he read everything she wrote, completely, twice, without rushing. "The marriage clause argument," he said. "Clever but wrong," she said. The Territorial Property Statute superseded the Missouri framework on exactly this point in 1879. I cited it by section and subsection. "Where did you learn the section and subsection?" "I looked it up. 3 weeks ago." He looked at her. "When you first read the note?" "Yes. Before you knew about Vare. I read every contract I'm given as if I might need to defend it," she said. "My father taught me that. He said the time to read the fine print is before there's a problem. Because after there's a problem, you're reading it, under pressure, and you miss things." Colt was quiet. "He sounds like a useful man," he said. He was. She took the letter from beside the door and put it with the envelope they would take to Reverend Pruitt in the morning. "Get some sleep," she said. "Thursday is going to be a long day." He picked up his coffee. "Marin." She turned. He was looking at his cup, the way he looked at things when he was choosing between the honest words and the easier ones. She had learned this about him over 18 days. The cup meant he was about to say something real. "The late payment," he said, "last spring. The one Vare has been using. Yes, I made it late on purpose. She waited, I had the money. I could have paid on time." He set the cup down. "I didn't. Because if I paid on time and the note renewed and the property continued, I was going to have to keep being here, this. And I wasn't." He stopped. She understood what came after the stop. "You weren't sure you wanted to keep being here," she said quietly. He nod, slow, the kind that costs something to give. That's what you meant, she said, 2 years ago. The offer to pay the note. You refused it because you weren't sure you wanted the problem solved. He looked at her. Yes, the kitchen was very still, she thought about what that cost him to say. A man who had spent 4 years being completely self-sufficient operationally and emotionally. Admitted that there was a period, a real period, where he had been letting things run down on purpose, including himself. But you're still here, she said. Yes, so something changed. Something changed. She waited to see if he would say what he didn't, but he picked his cup back up and sat down. And stayed in the kitchen for another half hour, while she wrote out the notes for their meeting with Reverend Pruitt. That was something. Thursday came with hard frost and clear sky. The kind of morning that makes the mountains look like they were placed there overnight, crisp and deliberate. Like the world had decided to be legible for once. They drove down together. The wagon track was frozen and the going was steady. Marin had the envelope with the notice and the response letter, the 7 pages of documented discrepancies, and a copy of the land office filing that she had written out from memory and had Reverend Pruitt already agreed to verify. He was waiting at the church when they arrived. Silas Pruitt was 60, white-haired. The stillness of a man who has listened to a great many difficult things over a long career and has developed the ability to hear all of them without flinching. He reviewed the notice of intent to renew. Read it carefully. This is in order, he said. We need you to accompany us to Vare's office, Marin said. As witness to delivery. I've been waiting for someone to ask me that for about 2 years, Pruitt said. He put on his coat. Vare's office was on the main street of Cimarron, a good building, well-maintained. The sign on the door, Denton Vare, Land and Finance. They went in. Vare was at his desk. He looked up, he saw Colt, saw Pruitt, saw Marin. And something happened behind his eyes that was not visible exactly but was present. A rapid recalibration. The morning he had planned shifting. Under him. Briggs, he said. Reverend, a pause. Mrs. Briggs. We're delivering the notice of his intent to renew, Marin said. Paragraph 4, Section 2 of the original note. We're also responding to Mr. Hargrove's letter of this week. She put both envelopes on his desk. He did not pick them up. Immediately, the marriage clause argument, he said. Hargrove's position is that the Territorial Property Statute of 1879, Section 12, Subsection 3, explicitly supersedes the Missouri framework on spousal property rights in note agreements, she said. Mr. Hargrove cited that framework. It doesn't apply here. The response letter contains the specific citations. Vare looked at the envelopes, looked at Pruitt. Pruitt stood near the door, with his hands folded, still, present. The way a man stands when his presence is the point. You've been thorough, Vare said. The notice is valid, she said. The renewal clause stands. We're exercising it. He was quiet. The office was well furnished. A clock on the wall. A good rug. The evidence of 11 years of transactions. On the shelf behind him, land deeds in labeled folders. She could see from where she stood that 3 of the folder labels were property names she recognized. Halverson, Pratt, Dewey. Except Dewey's folder was thinner than the others, which meant Dewey hadn't signed yet, which meant there was still time. The Dewey property, Vare said, following her gaze. I imagine you've been to see them. We have, she said. And what did you tell them? The same thing I'm telling you. The renewal clause stands. The account errors are documented. The pattern is documented. She paused. I've also prepared a summary of the Eastern Mountain Land and Transit filing at the county land office, the one you filed as local representative of record 14 months ago. The clock on the wall ticked. Vare was still. That's public record, she said. I simply read it. He looked at her for a long moment. The pleasant surface of him working hard. The man underneath doing arithmetic of a different kind. Mrs. Briggs, he said. The contempt from before was gone. In its place was something more careful, more considered. The tone of a man who has encountered an obstacle he did not expect and is reassessing its dimensions. You're a capable woman. Yes, she said. I am. He picked up the envelopes. He did not say anything else. Reverend Pruitt made a note in the small book he carried, dated it, signed it. The renewal is filed and witnessed, Pruitt said. As of today, Vare nodded once. They left. Outside the air was very cold and very clean. Pruitt shook both their hands, said quietly to Marin, "I've been hoping someone would do that for 2 years," and walked back toward the church. They stood on the street. The mountain rose above the town. The sun was on it, the snow on the upper ridge, bright enough to hurt. Below the ridge the valley ran east to west, flat and long. "It worked," Colt said. "It was always going to work," she said. "The law was on your side. It just needed someone to say it out loud." He looked at the mountain. She looked at the valley. The railroad route was still there. The plan was still there. Vare would find another way eventually. Men like Vare always did. But not today, not this property. Not while she had 7 pages of documented discrepancies and a copy of the land office. Filing full end. Text of the 1879 tarot committed to memory. "He'll try again," Colt said. "Probably," she said. "But it'll be harder now. We've made the shape of it visible." To Pruitt. To Dewey, to the county land record, she paused. "Visible, things are harder to do quietly." He looked at her, that look. The one with no wall in front of it. He held it for longer than usual. Then he turned to the wagon. "Come on," he said. "It's cold." She followed him. But she noticed, as they drove back up the mountain track, that he took the long way. The road that ran along the ridge before descending to the property. The road with the view. He didn't say why. She didn't ask. She just looked at the valley below. Long and gold in the late morning light, the pine trees on the slopes above it, the ridge, the sky. The world was very large. She was still in it. Ruth Canby came that afternoon, without Peaches this time, just herself, which meant she had heard. She came in, sat down, accepted coffee. Pruitt told the Halverson boy, she said by way of explaining her speed. Who told his mother? Who sent her hired man? Word travels, Marin said. On this mountain it goes faster than weather. Ruth wrapped her hands around the cup, looked at Marin. How are you? Fine, Marin said. That's not what I asked. Marin stopped. Considered the question. I don't know yet, she said. Ask me in a week. Ruth nodded. Like that was the right answer. Like the wrong answer would have been the easy one. Dewey's wife sent a message, Ruth said. She wants to know if you'll look at the Halverson accounts, too. I told Eldon to give me 3 weeks. I know how long it's been. Marin set her cup down. I meant 3 weeks from the meeting, not from today. Ruth smiled. The real one. The one she kept behind the careful one. There are 4 other families, Ruth said, in this territory, who've had Fenwick in their accounts. Marin looked at her. 4, she said. 4, she sat with that. 4 more sets of books. 4 more patterns of deliberate errors. 4 more families who had been quietly paying more than they owed to a man who had arranged for them to do it. She thought about what Eldon Dewey had said. Would you be willing to look at other accounts? For pay. She thought about what her father had taught her. How to hold a column of numbers in her head while her hand wrote a different one. How to find the error that wasn't an error. How to read the shape of something before she saw the whole of it. She had been doing this since she was 14 years old. She had been doing it for other people, for her father, for Thomas, for the grain merchant, for the bank she had tried to argue with over her own land. She had never once done it for herself. Until now. Tell them I'll come, she said. After the new year. 1 property at a time. Ruth looked at her with the expression she had been looking at her with since the first visit. The one that said she had been hoping for a particular thing and was the first clear evidence of it. Good, Ruth said. Just that. Good. She finished her coffee and left. Colt was in the barn when Ruth's wagon went back down the road. Marin stood at the kitchen window and watched it go, and thought about 4 more families. About 7 pages of documentation. About a territorial statute she had memorized on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks ago, because her father had told her to read things before there was a reason to. She thought about what she was good at. Not a comfortable thought, exactly. She had spent 14 months not thinking about what she was good at. She had spent 14 months thinking about what remained. What was left after the land and the income and the person she had built her life alongside had been taken away in that order, by that particular combination of fate and lung disease, and a banker who had told her the clause she cited was a fine point that didn't change the outcome she had thought was starting over. But you don't start over. She understood that now. You carry forward, all of it. The 14 months and the grain merchants and the 14-year-old girl counting bales in the dark, and the woman who had learned to set a fence post and mix wood glue, and read a promissory note by lamplight. You carry forward and you set it down somewhere. This was where she had set it down. She went to the kitchen table, opened the ledger to the current month, began to write. She was still writing when Colt came in. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, took off his coat, hung it on the hook, looked at her. "Ruth's message," he said. "About the other families, you heard. She talks at a volume that assumes people need to hear." Marin looked up. 4 more properties, I know. They'll need to be reviewed, documented. The renewal notices prepared before their due dates. I know, he said again. He sat down across from her, the lamp between them, his hands on the table. Open. She had noticed this, the way he held his hands. When they were closed, it meant he was working something out. When they were open, it meant he had arrived somewhere. You could do that, he said. Review them. Prepare the documents. Yes. From here, she looked at him. He met her eyes. Directly, you would need the ledger space. And time. And probably access to the county record office, which means trips to town. He said it matter-of-factly, not offering anything. Describing a situation. That would require a base of operations. It would, she said. This is a reasonable location, he said, geographically. For the mountain properties, she looked at him for a long moment. He was looking back at her with the absolute stillness of a man who has said the thing he intended to say and is waiting to see if it landed where he aimed it. It had, but she was not going to let him get away with it that easily. "Colt," she said, "yes, are you telling me your house would make a good office for an accounts reviewer?" "I'm noting that it would be practical," he said. "Yes, that's very practical of you." "I'm a practical man." She looked back at the ledger. A smile was happening on her face that she was trying to manage. "Mostly failing. I'll think about it," she said. "All right." He got up to pour coffee, and she thought, this is how he does it. This is how a man who spent 4 years forgetting how to need anyone asks someone to stay. Not with the words for it, with the architecture of the thing. Building the practical reasons like a man building a house, piece by piece. Each piece where it needs to be. She understood that she was going to make him say it anyway. Ruth came back the following Saturday, 8 days after the first visit, alone, without a jar of anything. Which meant she had come specifically to have a conversation, rather than to appear to have come for another reason, and have the conversation as a secondary event. She found Marin in the kitchen garden. The onion sets were showing their first growth, thin green threads, pushing up through the cold, hardened soil. Marin was on her knees in the dirt, checking the spacing. Ruth stood at the garden edge. "You're staying," she said. Not a question. Marin sat back on her heels. Looked up. "I haven't decided." Ruth looked at her with enormous patience. The patience of a woman who has been 63 for long enough that she no longer has any interest in letting people pretend about things. "You've planted onions," Ruth said. Marin looked at the onion sets. She had planted them 12 days ago, hardy variety. They would need to winter in the ground. They would be ready in July. Julie was 8 months away. "You plant things you intend to harvest," Ruth said. "You've been here 3 weeks, and you've planted onions and replaned the south window sash and re-mortared the kitchen. Hearth, and I'm told you've agreed to review accounts for 4 families come the new year." She paused. "I'm not sure what decision you're waiting to make." Marin was quiet. "I want it to be a decision," she said finally, "not a conclusion." "There's a difference." Ruth looked at her. "Yes," she said, "there is." And the sharpness in her softened into something else. Something that had seen a great deal and was not unkind about any of it. He cared for this place better when there was someone else in it. He just forgot why that mattered. She paused. "Don't let him mistake your being good for him for the only reason you're here. He'll try to. Men do, I know, Marin said. Make sure he knows you know. Marin looked at the onion sets. I will, she said. Ruth walked back down the path without ceremony. Marin stayed on her knees in the garden for a while longer. The cold of the soil through her skirt, the smell of turned earth and pine. The thin green threads of the onion sets moving slightly in the wind off the ridge. She was good at this, at finding the thing that needed doing and doing it. At reading the shape of a problem before she saw the whole of it. At working in near dark, and not flinching. She had always been good at it. It had just taken her until now to do it somewhere she had chosen. He asked her that night, not the practical version, not the architecture version, the real one. She had not expected it. She had been at the table reviewing the Dewey documents, the lamp low, the fire in the stove, banked for the night. He had come in from checking the barn, hung up his coat, and stood in the kitchen doorway in the particular way he stood when he had something to say and was choosing between the words for it. She waited. Marin, different from the first time. The first time had been her name like a door left ajar, testing whether he had the right to it. This time, it was her name said the way you say something that has become necessary, that you cannot get to the next thing without saying first. She set down her pencil. Marin. The arrangement. Yes, I want to ask you something. She waited. He came into the kitchen, sat down, not across from her, beside her, which was different. The lamp between them, low. The arrangement was a legal document, he said. Terms. He stopped. That's not what I'm asking about. She looked at him. His hands were open on the table. Do you want to stay, he said, not as a suggestion, not as a practical observation about the geographic utility of the location. 4 words. Plain. Kind of plain that costs something to get to. She thought about the needle case on the east windowsill, where she had put it the first day. On the east side where the morning light reached it, which was either something she had done practically or something she had done because she already knew, on some level she hadn't consulted yet, that she was going to want the morning light there. She thought about the dress on the hook, which she had not moved, not because she was performing sensitivity, because it belonged there, because Briggs hung it there, and it was still hers. And this was still, in some way that did not conflict with Marin being here, her house too. She thought about the onion sets, 8 months away. She thought about a man who had left a pry bar at the barn door and walked away rather than say he'd watched, who had put a larger portion on her plate without explaining it, who had sat in the kitchen with her instead of going to the barn more times in the last week than she could count, who had sat down beside her instead of across from her, who had asked the real question instead of the practical one. She thought about what Ruth had said, make sure he knows you know. Yes, she said. She said it without hesitation, without performance. The way you say something true, his face did the thing that happened when he was feeling something that had no protocol. Except this time he did not look away. This time he held it, not because the arrangement, she said. Not because there's nowhere else. Because this is where I've decided to be. He was looking at her, the lamp between them, the fire low in the stove, the pine trees moving outside in the wind off the ridge. I know the difference, she said quietly, between staying because I have to and staying because I choose to. I need you to know that I know. He held her eyes. I know, he said. And then he reached across the table and picked up both her hands. Just that, both her hands from the table where she'd set them, and her hands did not shake. She noticed that. The absence of it. No pressing them flat. No managing the trembling from the inside. Nothing to hide. They were just hands, held by someone else's hands, in a kitchen in the mountains. In the quiet of a night that had settled into something it had not been before. Outside, the south pasture held the last of the evening light. The fence lines ran straight across it. The south parcel was still theirs. The kitchen smelled of coffee and wood smoke and linseed oil from the mended window sash. The parlor chair held a cushion with an invisible seam. The east windowsill held a needle case. She had arrived with $3 and 4 days before everything ran out. She had not expected this man. She had not expected to find in the wreckage of everything she'd lost, that the thing she had always been good at was not a consolation. It was hers. It had always been hers. And here, finally it had somewhere to go. She had arrived with the needle case and $3. She stayed with something that wasn't in the bag. The right to be somewhere because she had chosen it. Not rescued. Not resolved. Not managed into a conclusion by circumstance. Chosen quietly, deliberately. The way you plant something in cold ground and trust the season.